Hey, welcome to Mooney Reads. My name is Beck, and today I'm going to be talking about my TBR for the Asian Readathon and for the Sapphicathon. Now, in my last video, I did my TBR for the Heroes Readathon, and at that point, I thought that that was the only readathon I was going to participate in. I hadn't seen really a whole lot for May, and as I've said before, the way that I do end up reading is a little bit more organic. So I probably shouldn't set myself up a bunch of TBRs if I know I'm not going to get to all of them. However, since then, I've found 2 readathons that look really interesting, so I'm going to be putting together TBRs for those as well. I'm just going to go ahead and apologize because throughout this video, my phone keeps slipping. I'm just using a stack of books as a tripod because I don't actually have one with me, so we're just going to have to be okay with that. The first readathon that I'm going to talk about is a month-long readathon put together by Read with Cindy. The goal of this readathon is to celebrate Asian Heritage Month and read a bunch of different Asian authors. There are really 5 different prompts you can follow for this, but alongside these prompts, it is suggested that for each book you try to read from an author with different ethnicities. I will be doing 4 of these 5 prompts. I'm not going to be doing the read-along book because I can't really get it right at this moment. So, the prompts that I will be following include prompt number 1, which is to read a book by an Asian author. Really simple. The book that I have for that is Lalani and the Distant Sea, which is a children's book based on Filipino folklore by a Filipino author. It looks really neat, and just the cover art and everything, it looks super adorable. If you'll notice, this version that I have is an ARC. I've mentioned before that I work at a bookstore and we get ARCs. Sometimes we get ARCs kind of late though, because I didn't even notice this ARC in there until the book was actually out on the shelves. I don't know if that's a me not noticing thing and maybe it was just out for a while, maybe somebody returned it, maybe they send ARCs to bookstores at different rates. I don't really know, but I'm glad that I have it and I'm looking forward to reading it as a part of this readathon. The next prompt is to read a book written by an Asian author that also has Asian characters that you can relate to. So another part of their identity is something similar to you. For that, I actually picked nonfiction, so it's not the characters, it's about actual people. But it's called Restoried, Selves, Autobiographies, Queer Asian Pacific American Activists. I chose this because I'm queer, so I imagine I can relate at least to parts of their stories. I've actually had this book for a good little while. I got it from a used bookstore for like $1.50. It looks like it was originally published in 2004 and then maybe republished in 2011. I could be wrong about that. Regardless, it's not like new, but it's also not super old. But I'm excited to get into that. For the next prompt, we have a book written by an Asian author with an Asian main character that is different from you. For that, I chose American Born Chinese by Jean Lin Yang, and I do not necessarily relate to this character because I've never been a young Asian teenage boy, particularly not one stuck in kind of like a spiritual fantasy-ish setting. And this, for those who don't know, is actually a graphic novel. It's pretty well known, so I recently got a copy of it. And the final prompt for the Asian Readathon is to read a book recommended by an Asian. For this, I'll be reading a book that Cindy recommended in the announcement video for this year's Asian Readathon, and that is The Boat, which is a webcomic about Vietnamese immigrants, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously, I've read it, so I don't totally know what it's about. I mostly picked that because it's free. It's a webcomic. And it sounded pretty interesting. The art looks pretty neat. So there you have the Asian Readathon. I do have a couple of books that I considered putting in that I'll probably end up getting to this month. I'm going to go ahead and mention these 2 because it's something that could work for the Asian Readathon. And I know sometimes people watch these TBR videos for suggestions of what to read. So 2 other books that I might read that technically fit because they're by Asian authors include Our Dreams at Dusk, Volume 3. I read the first 2 and absolutely adored them. It's basically a series about an LGBT drop-in center. Each book focuses on a different character's backstory. And I think they're each different parts of the LGBT community. I'm not totally sure because I kind of assumed that this character was just a gay guy, but I could be wrong. I guess I'll find out once I read it. And it's actually written by a non-binary author. So if I don't get to it next month, I plan on getting to it next month when I'm only going to be reading books by trans and non-binary people. The other book that would work for the Asian Readathon that I've got kind of ish on my TBR is When You Ask Me Where I'm Going by Jasmin, Kaur. and it's a poetry book. I don't really know a whole lot about it. It sounded neat, and like I mentioned about the arcs at work, I kind of just saw it laying around, so I've taken it home. Or I took it home several months ago. I have not been at work recently because of COVID. Bookstores are closed. The next TBR that I'm going to go over is for the Sapphicathon. Now, this readathon is only a week long. It goes from the 18th to the 25th. So for this readathon, I actually am going to double up on some of the books just because I don't know how feasible it would be to read 7 books in a week. That would be pretty ambitious. I do tend to try to do a book per prompt for things, but not this time. The first prompt for Sapphicathon is to reread a book, and for that I've chosen Blue is the Warmest Color. This was an excellent book. There's a film of it as well, but I do not recommend that film because the main actresses in the film felt super uncomfortable and the director's a creep. So pick up the book. That's actually written by a sapphic woman. It's not as graphic as the movie. If you've seen the movie, at least to me, it felt like all of it was a sex scene. This is not. Less than 10 pages are sex scenes, and they're not even super graphic. There are boobs, but nothing super intense by my metric anyways. But the artwork for this is really interesting, and even if the director hadn't been questionable, I would still recommend the book over the movie. The movie misses the point of it entirely, and a lot of that's because it's directed by a cis man. The book is actually looking largely at kind of the power of heteronormativity, particularly for queer women, but really I would think that both of the characters in here are probably lesbian, just based off of kind of some of the stuff that happens. I will say, if you're interested in reading this, the first like 2/3 or 3/4 of the book is fantastic, but the last bit, the pacing is just, it goes so fast, so that was disappointing. However, it's still an enjoyable read, so I highly recommend it, and this is what I'm going to be rereading. It's a graphic novel, so it'll go a little bit faster. The next prompt is to read a graphic novel. If you watch my Heroes Readathon TBR, you'll know that I have lots of LGBT graphic novels. 3 of them are sapphic, but we're going to add more. The graphic novel that's going to be covering this prompt is also going to be covering prompt number 3, which is a book with a trope you love, and that is the Kase-San and Yamata Volume 1. I did a full review video for the first 5 Kase-San and series, and this is the first volume of Kase-San and Yamata, where they're in college. They're technically in college the first half of the 5th book, but this is all college days. So the trope, I guess, would be just pure fluff or romance for romance's sake. I absolutely adore this series, so I'm really looking forward to finally getting to this book. Prompt number 4 for the Sapphicathon is to read a book by an author of color. The book that I'm using for this also covers prompt number 6, which is a book that's been on your TBR for a long time. And that book is Borderlands, Frontera, The New Mestiza by Gloria Anzaldua. This is a book of essays and poems by Gloria Anzaldua, who is a really important person in women's and gender studies. She is a Chicana lesbian who talks about her ethnicity and her sexuality. I'm super excited for this. I've read bits and pieces of various things by Gloria Anzaldua, but I have yet to read this from cover to cover, so I would like to get to that during the Sapphicathon. The next prompt is a book that you got for free, and for that I chose Annie on My Mind by Nancy Garden. This was a Christmas or possibly birthday present from one of my friends. He even wrote a little bit in the cover, which is just great and adorable. This is kind of a classic young adult queer book. I don't actually know a whole lot about it, but I'm kind of okay just knowing that it's a classic. And the final prompt that I have for the Sapphicathon is free choice. Naturally, I put a nonfiction as free choice, so technically Borderlands, Frontera would fit it. However, I do want to try to cram another book in. Whether or not I'll finish it, I'm not too sure, but I at least want to start it during the Sapphicathon. And that is Odd Girls and Twilight Lovers, A History of Lesbian Life in the 20th Century by Lillian Faderman. This goes decade by decade through the 1900s and talks about different subcultures of lesbians in different cities. I'm super stoked about this. I think that books like this are really important. A lot of gay history books really mostly only focus on gay men. So I am really excited to read this. There is one more book for this that I considered putting in, but there's just literally no way that I'm going to be able to read it and these other books in a week. But it's worth mentioning, and that is The Well of Loneliness by Radcliffe Hall. It would have fit prompt number 6, a book that's been on your TBR for a long time. This is a classic lesbian novel. It was written in the 20s, I believe, and this was, for a lot of people at the time, one of the first places that they actually saw anything about being a lesbian. So I do want to get to this at some point. So if by some miracle I actually have time at the end of Sapphicathon, I'll start this. And I would actually be comfortable reading this into next month. Next month I do only want to read books written by trans authors. And at the time that Radcliffe Hall was alive, there wasn't the same language around gender and things like that. So there are some scholars that think that Radcliffe Hall might have identified as non-binary or trans had they been around. If nothing else, they're definitely gender non-conforming. And I think that kind of gender non-conforming people that existed before any sort of terminology kind of should be included in things like that. They did heavily impact the LGBT community in general, but also kind of what is the trans community now. So this would also be an important read for them. So those are all of the books that I'm going to be reading for the Asian Readathon and the Sapphicathon. I do think that both of these readathons are really important. Acknowledging Asian Heritage Month is super important. A lot of the times I think when we talk about authors of color, Asian people tend to get left out of that conversation. In general, during discussions of racism, Asians get left out just because how they experience all of that is different than other minorities. Granted, every minority has a different experience because they have different histories. So it's really important to be able to see from those different perspectives. Sapphicathon is also really important because so many of the hype books are very male. You get lots of books that are talked about in terms of like gay men, but people don't tend to focus as much on women who love women. So this is a good time for that, especially since Pride Month is next month. So it's good to go ahead and read some. And I know for me specifically, I want to go ahead and read some of the Sapphic books that I have before then because I'm only going to be reading trans authors. So I think all of these books that I have that are Sapphic are written by cis women, with the exception, I already mentioned how Radcliffe Hall, it's a little bit more up in the air gender-wise, but for the most part I'm just reading cis women. So these are books that I wouldn't be able to get to next month anyways, even though they are good if you are looking for some gay ladies to add to your Pride TBR. That's about all that I've got. If you've read any of these books, let me know what you thought. If you're going to be doing the Asian Readathon or the Sapphicathon, let me know. You can maybe talk about the book that you're most anticipating for that. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.